Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Newsgram. This episode is being written and produced during the holiday season. So in the spirit of family, friends, and Christmas, I thought it made sense to join Dr. Augustine Jeyaraj, a liver transplant surgeon, in his virtual walk with Jesus. Now that isn't as random as it sounds. Augustine has written a book that's been getting a lot of positive reviews from Catholic reading circles. People are saying it doesn't preach at you from above. Rather, it walks beside you, which is kind of on target with his goal because he is walking beside Jesus. It's called an easy read, but deep theologically, which can be a rare mix. The book is called The Word in Their Voices, a Catholic pilgrim's journey through scripture and poetry. And it's a collection of poems spoken through the eyes of the people who lived the stories. Mary at the foot of the cross, Judas in his agony, and others as well, which we'll get into in a minute. Here's Augustine.
Faith has always been very important to me throughout my life. It's just that I never gave it the attention it needed until maybe the last 15 years. And as I grew more in the faith, I began to realize that there was a very rich tradition of not only scripture within the Catholic Church, but in fact parabiblical sources, like for example St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, and even the mystics. And when you put them all together, there's this huge wisdom in the literature that's out there, but difficult to get access to.
He says his original intention was to write a book that was easy and simple for people to understand biblical issues, and he knew he was on the right track because as he dug deeper, Scripture began to shift from something printed on a page into something breathing and alive.
Scripture is not something distant, preserved in pages, but perhaps there's a living story within it, pulsing with the breath of those who once walked the earth. And so I tried to actually relive their lives through poetry in their voices, and that's what was born,
So that realization became the seed for the book. Then came the foundation, what the Bible truly is at heart.
The Bible is not a book of doctrines or a book of philosophies compiled together. It's a chronicle of human lives. Men and women who loved, they doubted, they hoped, they despaired, they made choices and bore the cost of their faith. They inhabited cultures and languages, vastly different from our own. And yet, through their fragile humanity, God spoke. So, when God didn't choose Abraham or Noah or, David even, who were superlative in their faith. They were humans with their flaws. And actually, I wanted to really explore that, the people who lived their lives, mistakes they made and how they overcame it, because that's an important story for us, that we too can actually live the faith, make our mistakes, but come back.
And if you're ready for a plot twist, he points out that faith is not always a guarantee of a good life.
I think that's the one mistake that people get. And they think that, if I'm going to invest in this faith, my life's going to be perfect. No, that's not true. Faith is not a life of certainty. Faith is about living with the uncertainty. It's a peace that helps you navigate the difficulties of life. That's what faith gives you,
And what about those who have no faith at all? There are plenty of people out there, non-believers, who think it's all just a bunch of religious nonsense.
People always say that faith is irrational, but in fact, faith is supra-rational. And I think it's supra-rational because when you look at all these witnesses in the Bible and live their lives, they too lived as we did. They had the same worries and tendencies and uncertainties, but the hope is what got them through. And we have that hope as well. This is a wonderful gift we have in the form of our faith, and actually face all the adversities with the certainty that God will see us through.
So that is some of his thinking behind the book, his philosophy, if you will. Now let's open it up and have a look at some of the poetry about the people within the Bible. As you know, these people lived thousands of years ago, so the first thing he wanted to do was to help bridge the time gap.
I started with the two popes, Pope Francis and Pope Leo, because they are within our cultural era, our same period. So it's easier to go into their minds. People would understand when I start the poems with these two. And then I moved back to St. Augustine. St. Augustine, who lived about AD 430, I think he's really important because he's really the theological lens through which you actually appreciate all the other poems. Because I think the poem that I wrote about St. Augustine is entitled Odo Amoris, which means the order of love. Basically what he says, it's not wrong to love things, but you must love them in the right order. And I think love of God is central, and then everything falls into place.
There are poems in the book about Judas, Peter, and Stephen, the first Christian martyr. He writes about a Roman centurion and the unnamed people who walk with Jesus. But he says one of his favorites is the one he wrote about Mary.
It was a reflection on Michelangelo's Pieta, which I saw in Rome. And it's Mary holding Jesus, but one hand is open and another hand clutches. And I meditated on it, and I went on a tour organized by Edward Sri, and he had asked us to think about that statue and about the two hands, one open and one clasped. And it's really a mother's dilemma. On the one hand, she wants to hold on to Jesus, right? On the other hand, she's letting him go down to the altar. And so I thought, hey, maybe I would see it through Mary's eyes, a mother's dilemma of loving your son but having to let him go to fulfill his duty that he was born to do.
And he saved the most important voice for last, Jesus himself. Augustine asks the question, do you know Jesus? Not know about him, because we all know who he is, but do you truly know him?
That's the last poem I leave everyone in the book. No matter how much theological insight or academic knowledge you have, or how much you read the Bible, at the end of it, it's really the encounter with Jesus, right? Do you not know about him, but do you know him? And I think that's the most important question we need to answer. And the last poem tackles that before I close off.
I'm kind of a skeptic at heart and have lived most of my life with one eyebrow raised, so I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I am really good at asking questions, and that curiosity has been both a blessing and a curse sometimes. So if you too are the kind of person who's naturally suspicious or skeptical, I think you'll appreciate Augustine's final bit of advice.
I think it's very important to discern the truth for yourself, not just listen to anybody interpreting the word for you. And I think what Paul tells you is test everything and hold on to what is true. And that's what I'd like to leave everybody with.
Test everything and hold on to what you find to be true. A great place to wrap up this edition of Newsgram. The book, The Word in Their Voices, A Catholic Pilgrim's Journey Through Scripture and Poetry by Augustine Jeyaraj. It's out there waiting for you to discover it for yourself. It's heartfelt, relatable, and written to help anyone at any stage of faith draw closer to the God who spoke through ordinary, imperfect human beings like us. No matter what your faith, religion, or level of belief, I wish you a most joyous holiday season. And as always, thanks for listening to this edition of Newsgram from webtalkradio.com.